I'm a girl and her wool here. So today we're doing another dye with me video. So today's dye with me topic is going to be overdyeing. So I have a few skeins here, and they are skeins that I'm just not loving how they came out when I originally dyed them. And I'll kind of explain each one as I show them what happened. But we're gonna be heading to the dye pots just after that and checking out, seeing what we can do with them, seeing if we can make skeins that we like a little bit more. And so here's Nacho, and then I'm going to talk through, I definitely want to show these before so you can see what they look like before we do anything to them. Then we'll head to the dye pots and then come back because we will see what they look like after they're dry. So the first skein we have up is this bright reddish tonal, mostly tonal color. And this was supposed to be fall foliage. And so if you know fall foliage, it's really a toned down red that has a lot of greens, oranges, and yellows, but a brown overtone. And so it's not a super bright color. And when I was dyeing this, the red is just showing too much as pink. And reds happen that way. I feel like you really need high heat for red, and if you don't really get it to that point, it kind of just stays pink. And so I started to like add the other, because when it's in the pot you don't really know, and so I started to add the other layers, but I realized, you know, it's kind of like with knitting, if you don't like it where it is, you're not gonna like it later, right? It's like that same mentality. I knew I was just wasting time and dyes by continuing to dye the skein. So I ended up dyeing fresh ones, and I'm left with this. And so I don't love how it looks on its own, and so I don't want to sell it as a one-of-a-kind skein. And so we're going to do some overdyeing. So at this point, I'm not quite sure what we're going to do with it. I have a couple of ideas. One being I could keep it pretty bright and then do something like not in Kind Skeins anymore, where I add a bit of an overtone to it to just have the bright colors pop out but keep it toned down. So that's an option. I'm not normally a really big bright color in my shop person, and so we'll see what I come up with this one, but that is it first. Again, it's really supposed to be a deeper tonal red, but it came out really like a brighter pink. And so that skein was a 100-gram skein on my sock base. This next one is actually a 200-gram skein on my sock base, so you can kind of see the difference there. And this color was supposed to be Hello Gorgeous, which is really a gray and brown and kind of tan speckled color. And this one just came out too tonal gray, like it's a tonal gray with some speckles on it, which is not what Hello Gorgeous is. And so again, I wasn't too thrilled with this one, so I ended up re-dyeing it, but I did have 2 of these left over. And so instead of just putting tonal grays in my shop, I figured this would be fun to do an overdyeing of. It being a tonal gray, again, there are some speckles on there, but those will be easy to cover up. And I figured it's a nice blank slate. I can create, you know, a good one-of-a-kind colorway off of that. And the world is my oyster with this one. We can really do anything with this one. The last colorway is another 100-gram skein, and if you haven't already, go check out etsy.shop. Lisa is hosting a small business Saturday event that featured 3 local indie dyers, and we all have yarn up in her shop, and you do get a gift certificate if you buy from one of us through her shop. So all my winter colorways are there. They're only there for now, so if you want to shop my winter colors, definitely head on over to etsy.shop. And one of the colors that I wanted to put up in that chunk show was my Christmas colorway from last year, which was called Last Christmas. And it was just a red, green, kind of purple and blue, not super traditional Christmas colorway, but definitely had those elements in it. And I wanted to bring that back this year. And so I started dyeing it up. I didn't love how it was coming out, so then I kind of just messed around with it a little bit, knowing I wasn't gonna like how it was, so I tried at the time to just come up with a one-of-a-kind skein I liked. I still don't like how it came out. And I also decided to just not offer a Christmas colorway. It was just getting too close to December and too far past, I think, when people would want to buy Christmas colorways to be able to knit with in time for this year. So I ended up just nixing that idea and only offering one less colorway. But I do have the skein here that we are gonna overdye. So anyway, long story short, here's the skein. So you can see it has the reds and greens in there, and I ended up adding a lot of the blues just to, again, trying to make it a colorway maybe I thought I liked more. So the purples are also in there, and I just don't love how this came out. Like it's just not me. So I want to overdye this one as well. But I picked these three out because I thought they would show three really different things. So we have the one bright color that's pretty tonal, but it's bright, kind of a darker but more variegated skein, and then one neutral to overdye. So I thought these would be good test subjects for today. And so let's head to the dye pots and see what we can do with them. All right, so here we are. So I have that bright red hot pink skein in the pan, and you're going to see as I clean up around here that I'm actually using a different pot than I normally do. I usually use rectangular pans, but I'm going to slowly be switching over to these pots just because of how the pans react with the electric burners. They rattle around a lot, which is one, irritating to the ear, but when you're trying to control where dye goes, especially when you're speckling and the pan is rocking and rolling around, it makes it really difficult. So I've really been enjoying using this pot. I'm going to see how it kind of changes my colors a little bit. If there are ones that I'm going to need the pans for, we'll find out. But for now, I really enjoy dyeing with it, and so you'll see this pot being used throughout this dye with me today. So right now we're just waiting for things to really heat up a little bit more, and then we will get to overdyeing. The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that the water level is pretty high in the pan. Most of the skein is submerged, and that's because I really did want to hide a lot of the brighter reddish pink color. I didn't want that sticking out too much. So you'll see we're not going to completely douse it in dye. I do end up keeping the red tone to it, but you see the water level is pretty high, and actually here we kind of go with it. And so the dye will move around the pan quite a bit. And the first color that we're going to be using is kind of like a deeper reddish tone. So I'm kind of working into the reds here. I'm going along with the red, but I'm going to just be adding that deeper tone to it to just blend it in a little bit more and tone it down a little bit. So as always, I kind of speckle it around, not as always, but for a lot of the times, I speckle it around, and you're going to see I'm going to just kind of blend it in there. So you can see the height of the water level at this point. The dyes are sitting on top. It's not going to go into the water too much at this point, but it will blend into it. So it's not going to speckle it. And again, you can't see it too well here, but it's just a deeper tone of red, and it's just really going to be used to tone down the brightness from the last one. It's not the same red dye that I used originally. This is a totally different color. It's more of like a deep, not quite a deep pink red, but it's not a bright hot red. It's definitely just a darker tone. And so at this point, we've just kind of put it on top there, and I'm letting it set so it doesn't move around too much, but we're going to kind of move it around and apply more colors throughout the skein. So the next color I apply on top, and again, you see just a little bit of the skein sticking out at the top, so I kind of focus on speckling into that area. It's this really pretty gray blue color. It is a darker color, but it does show a lot of blue when it dries and sets. And so I thought it would just be really pretty. I thought it would blend in really well and create some kind of purple layers, which you even start to see on that top left there. So while the red doesn't reactivate from what was on the skein originally, it will start to show it through as purple once I add that blue on top, but then also because there's red in that water there, as well as me adding kind of the fresh red dye that didn't set, it does blend in pretty well. And I just put the lid on here because, again, I wanted it to heat up. That red wasn't getting soaked in, so I wanted to just give it a minute to really warm up. So now that that gray blue has set, I'm going to move it around a little bit and just keep doing the same thing throughout the rest of the skein. You can see here the water is getting a little less pink than it was. Maybe it's a little bit more purple now that that blue is kind of bleeding into it. Again, I'm totally fine. I didn't check to see if the blue was totally set, and that is because I really did want this skein to not be too variegated. I wanted it to be more of a tonal, and so I guess semi-solid. So it is gonna just kind of gather all that purple throughout the skein, which is really nice because then we'll have the reds in there, we'll have the blues in there, and then it'll blend it all together by creating that purple. So this is the same gray blue that I did before. I'm just putting more on top because, again, I wanted it to get kind of all throughout the skein. I didn't want it too variegated, and keeping more of the yarn underneath just means that I had to flip it over and make sure we got some consistency on the bottom. So this is going to get to set for a little bit, and then we will be back. So I hope you can see that jump in the color in the water. A lot of the red now did get absorbed, so the water and the color is really more what that gray blue is that I added to it, and it does have like that purple tinge as well to it. So the water is pretty clear at this point. If nothing's really bleeding out, I really let it set for a while. So again, as always, just moving it around and making sure we are hitting up the rest of the skein. I'm just kind of looking at it because, again, I am new to using this kind of smaller pan and I can see less of the skein, and so I just was taking it out so I could really look at it and see what I wanted to do. Again, I'm kind of just making this up as I go along, and so I didn't really have a complete plan. So I was just kind of looking at the skein and saying, what do I want to do? Do I want more of the red, more of that gray blue, a different color blue? So that's kind of what I was thinking. Again, the water is just getting more and more clear at this point, and so it's ready for some more. And I did end up putting more of a reddish color on there. I don't think, and again, I'm doing the voiceover later. Actually, yeah, it's the same red from the beginning, so I just wanted to get this side of it. I think this side of it had a lot of the pink part from the original skein. It was kind of not very bright or anything, but it wasn't very saturated either, and so I just wanted to get the pink on that side as well, just to blend it all in with the rest of the skein, and again, cover up a lot of that like reddish pink that I got the first time around. You should also be able to see that more and more steam is coming out of the pan now, so it is hotter than it was at the beginning, which is why this pinkish red is kind of getting absorbed more. Again, the water is still pretty clear, so that's good. It's reacting better than it was at the beginning, and I just didn't wait long enough for the water to heat up, which is fine. It just means that the dye kind of moved around in the pan a little bit more, and didn't, get right absorbed to exactly where I placed it, which again is fine. So I'm doing the second color again, that gray blue, just again making sure the skein is pretty even, and I think at this point that is pretty much that. And yeah, I'm at this point just gonna check and make sure I like how it looks, and kind of let that blue bleed out just to tone all of it together. I think at this point I just kind of do the same thing, moving it around, making sure it all has that kind of darker red that I'm adding to it, as well as that blue, and it really is making a very nice kind of purplish tone throughout it as well, which is really nice. So at this point I decided I wanted to get a little adventuresome with some speckles, and so this is a color that kind of shows up as like a really bright-ish brown color when it gets speckled, and so it didn't show up too much in the skein in the end. It didn't really have a huge impact, and I don't add any more after that. But again, with one-of-a-kind skeins, it's always good to just kind of test things out, see what works, see what doesn't work. And so this was a situation that it didn't impact the skein. It's going to come out just as nice as it would have otherwise, but if it did kind of speckle nicely, I might have added it throughout the skein. So that pretty much was it for this first skein. Again, just kind of toned it down with that gray blue color, that darker red color, Didn't speckle on top of it, just kind of left it as that tonal color, and you'll see how it comes out at the end. But at this point it is pretty much done, and I didn't want to make it too dark, so that was it. Alright, on to skein number 2. So to remind you, this is that 200-gram skein on my sock base that was supposed to be Hello Gorgeous but came out a little too tonal gray. And you can see in the pan there when it's sitting like that, it does look like it has a lot of that brown on there and darker. So you can see why when I was dyeing I thought it was okay, but when it dried it just was way too tonal. Again, this is a larger skein in that same pot, so it's kind of more squished in there. And for this one I did the water level really low. So a lot of the skein, a lot of the yarn is above the water, which means that the colors won't blend in together. And what I decided to do for this one is to take a whole bunch of colors that I thought looked well together and create a speckly variegated skein. So kind of keep that gray base to it, not change the base, but then just highlight a few different colors throughout it. And if you did watch 2 dye with me's ago, I tested out a new dye, and that is one of the colors that I end up using here. So I was glad I played around with it and knew that I would like it with the gray, and then we'll see where we go from there. Alright, so the water has started to heat up. So again, I'm going to be using that bright blue-green that we used in that dye with me that I was just talking about from the mini skeins. And if you remember from that video, it didn't speckle well. I kind of learned that. But I really do like the color. So I don't want to anticipate it to speckle. That's why I'm kind of smushing it around and just getting that blue-green to really pop. The skein is kind of in there randomly, so I'm just piling it on top, and then that way it'll be all throughout the skein. And so because I want it to stay pretty variegated, I don't want it to become a tonal where I let the colors bleed like in the first skein. I'm just going to let this sit and really make sure it sets before I start moving it around too much. Alright, so it's been a few minutes, and I've let this color kind of get in there and sit and set for a little bit. So we're going to start moving it around and add more to the skein. So again, you can see here once it kind of settles down, the water is still pretty clear. You can see it on that top right there a little bit. The blue didn't really bleed into it, which is perfect, and you can see the whole skein isn't blue. It's still that gray and just has the highlights of the blue. So what I'm actually adding here is like a brighter turquoise. Probably clumped it up a little bit more than I originally anticipated. That dye is very fine, and so it's easy to a lot of it kind of falls through that mesh strainer that I use. But that's also perfect because it's a big 200-gram skein. Can't be afraid to use all the dyes, and so it's a different color than the first one. It's definitely a brighter turquoise teal color, but it is related to that first blue-green we used. And so it's really nice because when they're in the skein together, they'll match. Like you might even think it's the same dye. That just is darker in some spots and maybe got a little bit more diluted, but what's nice about it is it does kind of bring that dimension to it without really making the dyeing too complicated. It's really just a different dye that I put down in a different area. So I did let that sit for a little bit, and then I moved it around and I cut that part out just while I was deciding what to do next. So this is a pink purpley color, and I didn't realize it until kind of later, but it is the same pink purple that we used in the last mini skein testing that we were doing. So if you remember, I did kind of like one that was all blues and greens, and then the last one I used that like pink purple color, and it really blended in nicely. And I think the reason why I took this one out is subconsciously a lot because of that. I knew that the blue that I used originally goes really well with like a pink purple, and I think that's why I picked it, even though it probably was at this point that I thought, oh, this is what I did in that mystery skein. So again, I just speckled it on top. This time I didn't smush it. I didn't necessarily want to have this color overtake the whole skein. I did really just want it to be a speckle and a highlight in some spots of it. You'll see in a little bit I do add some more, but for now I'm just letting that speckle sit on top and set, and I don't want to move the skein around until those speckles are good to go. And so even though I did let that sit, I am going to check it here, and pinks again can take a while to set, and so it was bleeding a little bit when I did this. You can see some of those speckles are smushed, so I am going to cover it and let it set. Alright, so I took the lid off. It was set this time, so we're going to start moving it around again. You can see some of it did come off, but that's okay. It wasn't too much. And like I mentioned earlier, you can still see the grays and the browns in there, but we kind of have turned this into a more variegated skein with blues and that hot, like brighter pink purple color. And again, this is a big 200-gram skein, and so I didn't want to just leave the amount of speckles I did on that one side as it, because when you take that whole big long skein out of there, there would have been barely any pink and purple. So by me adding this layer on there, it'll just kind of make it show up a little bit more, but it still won't turn the whole skein pink and purple. It's still going to be a lot of blues in there. But this is just, it would have been way too little if I kept it as it is. This time some of it did bleed into the water, so there will be parts where it kind of blends in, but again, that is fine. It's a large skein, and I've shown this before, but if you pick up one of the strands, so keep in mind this is a very thin yarn, if you pick up one of those strands, you need a bit of yarn to get the color to show up in the knitting anyway, and so having it blend in will still speckle your knitted project, and so I'm totally fine with those pinks kind of blending in there a little bit as well. All right, so the speckles have had time to set. Again, those pinks, it's getting hotter in there. There was more steam. They kind of bled a little bit more, which is definitely fine. But we're going to move the skein around again, see how we like it. Kind of like with that first skein, I kind of have to look at the whole skein. I'm making this up as I go. So I just had to see how everything looks. And you can see the blues are still there. Again, the grays are still there. There's just a hint of pink. So you can see there, it's really not a lot of that pink in that skein. Even though it looked like I piled it across the whole top, there was a ton of yarn underneath. So again, it's going to be variegated, colorful, but still have a lot of the gray to not make it like too in your face crazy, but it'll look really nice. So let me know in the comments what your favorite style skein is. Is it something variegated like this? Do you like it to be brighter? Do you like the first skein that I did that was more muted? All right, so now I come back and I speckle a third blue on there. So this is a really deep blue. And I just did that to, again, add a little bit more texture and dimension. I thought it would look really well, that kind of blending with that pink a little bit more, kind of bring out the pink and purple and just combine, you know, basically give a way for that to combine with the blues. I thought it would be a good bridge between those pinks and the brighter blues to just have something that blended in a little bit. So that was that with that color, and now I'm just getting the pot ready for skein number 3, which is going to be that really variegated color that I really didn't like how it was. And again, because it was variegated and because it was so colorful, I end up doing a dye bath. So you can see I put the dye into the water before I even put the yarn in, and that's going to just create a really uniform look across the whole skein. So the skein will really get to be you know, we'll get the dye distributed pretty evenly on there. I also filled up the water level really high on this one, and that was just be able so that I could fit all of the yarn underneath the water. I wanted all the yarn to be submerged into this dye bath, and so it actually took me a really long time to heat up all of that water. Again, the electric burners aren't as great as the gas stove, and so it took me a long time to get that heated up. What's really cool about doing the yarn this way is that you really get to see how quickly the yarn soaks in the dye. So again, the water now is heated up. You see the steam coming out, but if it were even hotter, you would just see the yarn really get overtaken by that color pretty quickly. And there's not that much dye in the pot. It definitely looks dark. I did a really dark gray. And you can see it's already toning it down quite a bit, and the gray is taking over. If the water were even hotter, it would have just soaked it all in very quickly. And I am realizing at this point the water is already getting clearer and the skein is still kind of looking very bright. And so I end up, and I know you guys can't see it so well because my glove was just in your face there, but you can already see it's a lighter color. So I end up adding more dye to the pan just because it's clear that it's going to take a lot to kind of overtake what I did to the skein originally. And I ended up adding some brown to it, and that is because brown tones down colors. It doesn't necessarily turn a skein brown, but it just takes the color that you have and tones it down. And here I go adding a little bit more gray in there just because I do want it to be a darker skein. And again, I'm just going to do like a uniform over dye around it, and that is because the skein itself was variegated and colorful. I did not need to add any more color to it. What I really was aiming for here was to just blend it all together and make it a more toned down version where the color wouldn't have been the majority of the skein. It just would have been a really cool accent to it, to have an overall dark skein and then just have some of these blips of color poke through. And so here you can really see how high that water level was. The yarn was completely submerged. And so I'm gonna let it just sit and absorb in all of that dye that I just put in there. So at this point I take the lid off. You can see the water's not clear, but you can definitely see that the skein is now dark. You can't see that bright blue in there and the reds and the green, and you'll see it a little bit more when I take it out, but it is a very dark skein and there's still a lot of dye in that water. So I end up taking the skein out so you can see, you still see the reds and the greens in there, and I'm trying to show it to the camera, but it's definitely a dark skein, right? And so I end up taking the skein out of the water and let it sit in another pan, just because I didn't actually want it to absorb any more dye. I didn't want it to become completely black, and so that's what I'm doing here. Okay, we are back and I have the finished skeins here to show you. So the first one that we did was the one that was really bright red and almost had like a pink red to it. And so what we did in the dye pan was I kind of threw on some darker colors to tone it down a little bit, but not take away from the red. I left the, I kind of embraced the red. So we started out with that deeper red, and then I brought in that gray brown or that gray blue kind of color, and this is what we ended up with. And so I really like this. Again, you still have the element of the red in there, but it just made it really nice, wintry, almost kind of Christmassy color, and it's still red, variegated, but overall really pretty. And there are definitely places where it comes across as purple, like that blue really kind of blended in nicely and made some really nice purple. So here's kind of a close-up of it. These skeins are all still wet, so if you're not already, follow along on my Vlogmas videos because I will show these when they're dry. I don't even want to take photos of them because I think they'll even lighten up a little bit more. But yeah, this came out really pretty, much happier with how it was before, and so this will be in the shop as a one-of-a-kind skein. The next one we did was the 200-gram skein that was kind of a gray tonal color with the speckles of brown on it that was supposed to be Hello Gorgeous. And for this one, I left a lot of the gray on there, but we brought in that blue-green color that we used in our testing in the Dye With Me like 2 times ago. And then we speckled some of that pink purpley color, and then otherwise we let the skein kind of shine through, and I really like this one too. So here it is. Again, it still has that gray base and you can still see a lot of the speckles that were on there, but I really like the combination of that with the different blues. I know we did a couple of blues on there, so you can kind of see some of the darker on there. And we didn't do too much. We did the turquoise as well, which you see in here. So you kind of get the different dimensions of the different color blues, but they do all really blend in together nicely. And then not too much of the pink purple, but it definitely is in there and blends in too. And so it's not a bright in your face color, but it's not a plain gray tonal color. It's just fun, polka dotted, kind of good color. So this will also be available. It is a 200 gram skein. I might break it down into 2 100 gram skeins, but let me know if any of you are interested in this kind of in its largeness. If you want to do a 2 skein shawl or something like that, I can list it. I don't like to do one of a kind skeins, usually in any size skeins. I usually just list them as 100 grams and that's it. So let me know. But that is that one. Really pretty. And again, you still see the gray base to it. We really didn't change it too much. We just made it more exciting. So then the third color was that really kind of variegated blue, green, and red that was supposed to be my last Christmas colorway, but it just didn't work out and I gave up on it. So we toned this one down a lot. We gave it a dye bath, and so we didn't speckle on it or anything. We just dunked the whole thing in, I think it was like grays and browns and some of that like gray blue actually too, to just tone down the whole skein. And so this is what it is. And this one really is more like an overdye. So you still see the green in there. You can still see plenty of the blue and the red, but it's just toned down and it kind of made the skein more uniform. So this looks like way more of a uniform skein than that highly variegated, colorful skein. And again, I pulled it out of the pot early because I didn't want it to darken up too much. I didn't want it to become like a black skein, which it didn't. You definitely still see the colors, and this really reminds me of my graffiti colorway, which I was dyeing at the same time as this. So I think that was part of my inspiration for doing it the way that I did, in that I didn't really change, you know, again, you still see all that it's there. It's just really toned down and dark. But when you knit with it, you will get the bits of color everywhere. So again, another really pretty one. So here is the after of the 3 skeins. I think that they turned out really nicely, and of course way better than they were before. So overdyeing really can change the skein, but of course you don't have to completely change it. You can just make it better than it was before. So that is that. As always, I do a giveaway in my Dye With Me videos. We didn't have one in the last video because I did my rose gold gradient giveaway in the vlog that I aired after that. So if you watched that, thank you so much for watching and entering. But we will have a giveaway for this video today, and that giveaway will be for a $20 coupon in my shop. So if you are interested in winning that, answer any prompts that I gave along the way in this video with a comment in this video below, and I will enter you and announce the winner on the next Dye With Me video in 2 weeks. And if I don't hear back from that winner, I'll announce it in the next video, and if I don't hear back by the time I film the following one, I will pick a new winner. So make sure you guys are watching, and that is the giveaway. Also, I am doing Vlogmas videos, and for as long as I'm doing Vlogmas throughout December, those are going to be the only videos that I post in December, so except for the Dye With Me's. I just clapped. Except for the Dye With Me. So I will be posting another Dye With Me in 2 weeks, but other than that, it is going to be all of Vlogmas episodes, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of those. And I will show updates of these in my Vlogmas videos as well, and you can follow along with some of my Advent work, as well as behind the scenes of A Girl and Her Wool. So I hope you enjoyed this Dye With Me. Thanks so much for watching and participating, and I will talk to you guys during Vlogmas. Bye!